Hello again and welcome to another bearing removal and replacement video featuring Boca bearings. Now today's engine is a very classic and high-powered two-stroke engine that dates back to 1988, at least that's when the review article came out, and is from a very famous manufacturer, and this engine is a YS-45FS engine. Now those of you that aren't familiar with YS engines, these are actually pressurized fuel system, so it's kind of like fuel injection, or it's basically a high pressure fuel system which results in immediate fuel delivery at any attitude, and they're just incredibly powerful and reliable engines. The particular one I've got was given to me by a friend, and I am in the process of refurbishing this engine and getting it back into its original state. And it is actually an engine that was last flown probably about 35 years ago or so, or maybe at least 30 years ago. And he sent it to me straight from the plane. So let's go to the table and look at this classic YS-45FS two-stroke engine. Okay, so here on the table is this beautiful YS-45FS engine. Now, as you can see, it looks a little different than the most standard two-stroke engines. I've got most of this already taken apart. I just kind of mocked it up so you could get an idea of what it looks like. But you'll notice here on the bottom we've got our fuel regulator and a rather interesting carb with a couple of inlets here, which is pressurizing the fuel line, pressurizing the tank, and then feeding the carb into the, or inlet into the combustion chamber. So this is an interesting setup because this carb is attached to the crankcase via the fuel regulator by these two long screws. So I'm going to be turning the camera off and go ahead and take these things off, take the head off again, and I've already got the rear cover off and the crank, the piston and connecting rod are already out, sleeves out of this engine. So it's basically ready to rock and roll as far as a bearing replacement. So let me just go ahead and take these two last screws out and we'll get on to removing and replacing the bearings on this engine. Okay, so I took the carb off and the fuel regulator, and you'll see here that there's a really stout gasket here. In fact, it's so stout it might actually come off in one piece. And it's important to always replace the gaskets on these YS engines. I'm not sure if that's gonna, I've got a new gasket set coming. Yeah, this one's gonna tear on me, but that's alright. This is going into the ultrasonic cleaner, because if you look at this side of the crankcase and then look at this side, I want the other side to look like this when it comes out of the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, since I already lost this gasket, I'll probably go ahead and disassemble that fuel regulator and everything, even though everything in the fuel regulator looked really good to begin with. In fact, I don't know how much runtime this engine had on it. There wasn't a whole lot of carbon on the top of the piston, but the bearings don't even feel that bad, but they're going to get replaced anyway, so I can refurbish this whole thing. So we're ready to do that. Let me go ahead and put my glove on and heat this crankcase up so we can pop this crankshaft out and see what we've got going on here. Hoping that is enough. It's a pretty beefy crankcase and it doesn't feel like that's super hot, but hopefully that'll be enough to get the crankshaft out. Oh yeah, it's coming out pretty easily here. Okay, so let's see. Okay, the bearing did come out on the crankshaft, so that is very helpful. Now let's just pop this front bearing out. And the thing that's beautiful about this YS engine is, despite how special it is, it uses a very common set of bearings. Very common set. And we'll talk about the kit number for this bearing set here, but it's not like it required any special thin or narrow bearings at all. They're really quite common. In fact, this is just an R6. So here we go. Here's our crankcase all ready to go into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, these gaskets are really stout and they're probably gonna, wondering if they would last, but since I'm cleaning it,
I have to replace all the gaskets anyway. But man, these things are stout. I'm hoping they're come off a little easier here. Okay, so to remove this bearing here, I'm going to use my technique where I just kind of get in the cutout here of the crankshaft and just kind of tap it down, and hopefully this will come off pretty easily. You know what, I think I want to slide this thing over here because I've got a hole here that I can at least kind of partially encapsulate that in. That bearing is really on there. There we go. There we go. And our bearings are off. So again, just a standard 6902 bearing. And it doesn't really feel that bad. In fact, these bearings, despite their age, I don't know how many runs this engine had on it, but based on the top of the piston, it had, I don't know, maybe a gallon of fuel through it. They don't feel all that bad. I'm probably going to throw these in the ultrasonic cleaner with them anyway, just to clean them up, and maybe use Boca's other two products, the Clean Touch and Bearing Soak, just for to play a game and just to see how good these feel after using those products on them. So there we go. I'm going to go out on the bench grinder with the wire brush, clean this crankshaft up and get all these parts in the ultrasonic, and we'll come back and install some bearings. Okay, so welcome back to the bearing installation portion of this video, and I've got the clean parts and some additional parts here that I just wanted to show for the condition of this engine. So here is the main crankcase that came out, and if you recall from the first segment, this side was really dirty and this side was clean, and just as I hoped, now both sides look equally clean. The rear cover wasn't really dirty at all. The inside wasn't too bad, and I also did not scrape this gasket off yet, but we'll get around to doing that. So the other two parts that were really dirty was the carburetor, and I did, since I had no gasket on here, I just dropped this whole thing in the ultrasonic cleaner. Now I'll go and disassemble this and clean it up some more because it's frozen up, and that's fine. I can heat that up and get that freed up. Here's the fuel regulator. So it was pretty dirty too. Now this one I did not put in the ultrasonic cleaner. I just did a hand cleaning with a toothbrush, and I only did that just because of the fact that this gasket is in perfect condition, and the silicone diaphragm and plunger that are inside here all look perfect. Now I probably will at some point take this out and take the adjustment screw all the way out and inspect those components, but for now I've kind of just decided that the way this thing looks, I'm not going to mess with this unless I have to after I run it and it doesn't run right. Then maybe I'll pop this thing off, peel that gasket off and put a new one on, because honestly this looks perfect. I mean, it's such a low time engine and I don't see any kind of damage to that silicone diaphragm at all. So I brought the piston over too, and just, this is uncleaned. This is exactly how the piston came out of the engine. So that's what that looks like. Very, very clean. It's an ABC engine. And finally, I'll get those parts out of the way. Finally, look at this crankshaft. This thing just sparkles now. It looks like it came straight from the factory. So with all that good stuff said, let's talk about what I'm going to be using here to do this bearing installation. So I've got my little glass jar here that I just put a little bit of Boca's Lightning Lube Road Power in, because this is what I use to do bearing installations and final assembly of these engines. And I think there's probably enough in here. This thing has probably got maybe 2 pumps left in it, but I think I've got enough in here to get these parts lubricated up. I've got my short socket extension that I use as a drive to drive the crankshaft in, my Delrin block, and of course my hammer, desk vise, and those things. So I'm going to go ahead and just lubricate crankshaft and the crankcase up here and get them ready for these bearings. Now, as I was saying, the bearings that are used in this engine, it's funny because sometimes these high performance engines you think would have a very special type of bearing, or, you know, an odd size, but that is not the case at all with this YS YS-45FS at all. It uses a very common size bearing, set of bearings that is common to probably at least 30 or 40, it looked like, other engines. And when you go and look up the kit number and then you drill down to the specific variant of that kit number that you want, there's a tab down there that says also fits. If you go click on that also fits tab, it'll just show you all the different engines that that particular set kit number of bearings fits, and it's quite extensive. So these parts are lubricated up. Let's talk about this very common kit, which is the ENK-001 kit. Now this particular variant that I have here that I'm going to install here is the 001 RS-ST, which means rubber sealed stainless steel bearings. So these are the ones I have on hand to put in this engine. Unfortunately, I'm going to be removing the rubber seals on both the rear bearing, both sides of the rear bearing and one side of the main bearing. So I'm not really getting the rubber sealed advantage for this engine. I mean, I guess I could leave them in, but that's just not how the bearings that came out of it looked. And speaking of the bearings that came out of it, I did put those through the ultrasonic cleaner, and they feel, the rear bearing feels rough now that it's all cleaned up and doesn't have any lubrication on it. But I'm still going to do my experiment where I soak them in the Boca's Clean Touch solvent, maybe even put them in the ultrasonic again in a container or a bag in there so they can get that solvent cleaning, and then drop them in a bearing soak for, I don't know, overnight, and just see if how they turn out. So here's our rear bearing. Beautiful rear bearing. You can't see the balls in there at all. And I'm going to use very gently these rubber sealed bearings that don't take a whole lot of effort at all to get these seals out. In fact, if you're careful with them, you can actually reuse these if you have bearings that are serviceable, and then you can just pop those things back in there. So I always, even though I don't reuse or service bearings, I always try to not have these get bent or damaged. And with the rubber sealed ones, it would probably be better if I were to use them in that capacity to use a T-pin to get these out, as opposed to a small flat blade screwdriver. So this bearing is ready to go, and obviously I'm just going to remove one side on the front bearing. And this will be the side that faces inside the engine. So as I usually always do, I'll put the front bearing in first. I'll go ahead and put the rear bearing on the main crankshaft and use that as a centering. The front bearing will be used as a centering mechanism. Flip this thing over here. Now let's heat this crankcase up and get this front bearing installed, and then our crankshaft. So let me get my glove on and do a little bit of heating here. Now that does inset a bit, so I'll probably use the drive hub, which I don't have with me. It's across the room, but it does look like it inset in there a little bit already. So I don't know, I could probably use the tip of this to make sure that we're fully inset in there. So yeah, we're fully inset now. So now let's just drop this main crankshaft in here. This is kind of warm, but not super warm. Let's drive this bearing home, and then we can finish the reassembly of this beautiful engine. You can kind of hear the sound, the pitch of that when it's fully seated in there. And there you go.
And now I can finish
reassembling this engine.